Amy Hume,
Yes.
voice and dialect coach. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We did a play together recently, and I remember sitting around on that first read, and especially working on something like Shakespeare, the actors who obviously have that vocal strength and flexibility, it's electric to witness, and it really does. They sort of, you know, as my old acting teacher would say, they sort of rip the other actors apart in a way. You know, it's like a tennis game, acting, I think, and it really does, I think, give you that edge. So how do you think what would you suggest is the kind of the goal of vocal work, if that's not too broad a question?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. What is the goal of vocal work? Well, what is your goal as an actor, and what are your limits as an actor? Because if your goal is to be an actor for screen or on stage, you have to have a voice that is going to be able to serve you. And if it doesn't, then it may end up limiting you. And I certainly know a lot of people who miss out on certain castings or find themselves eliminated from projects because their voice doesn't have that strength or dexterity to actually last them the length of a run, or to meet the whatever characterization or whatever vocalization that character requires.
So do you think it's about it's really getting your voice to a point where any challenge, any role, you can take that on?
Yeah. So you know your voice, you have to know your voice and what it can do, and you want to be able to access this massive range. We're all born with a 3 to 4 octave speaking range, and most of us from a pretty early age stop using that. So we go from having this really huge range of vocal capacity, and it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller as we just grow up, become civilized, learn how to behave out in the real world. But then as an actor, what you really need is that whole range. So training your voice allows you to reconnect to that whole capacity, so that if you have to play a character that has a moment of high intensity, or a character that may demand lower pitches or anything like that, your voice can go to those places. And you want to have that available to you always. You don't want to see a role coming up and think, oh, I've got to train my voice up for that role in particular. Great if you do that as something extra, but actually what you want is that always, right? Don't you want that to be the place that you always work from, not a place that you have to go to work from.
So would your general philosophy be that voice is kind of unlocking, if you will, what's already there, or is it kind of building up and sort of, creating a better voice through work, or is it a bit of a balancing act?
It's probably a little bit of both. I mean, there are certainly voice teachers who sit on either side of that philosophy. I think that certainly at the foundation of the work that I do is I really believe that we are all born with a free, expressive voice, and that we have to get back to that and reconnect to that and unlock that. So it could be limited by physical tensions, by emotional blocks, all sorts of things. And so the nature of the work is quite psychophysical. And then probably from there, you can then build it and get it stronger, get it more readily available, so you have access to it quite quickly, so that you can connect to it on impulse if you want to. But then if you had to fall back on technique, that you could connect to it through technique as well. So a mix of both things. It is about unlocking what you already have. And I think there's a lot of safety in that for an actor, because they don't have to look at it and go, oh, I've got to go get a voice. I have to build up this muscle, and I have to tone up. And actually it's kind of nice to go, it's already there. I just have to allow it out. I have to allow myself to connect to it, or reconnect to it rather, and then I have it. Right? Isn't that freer?
Yeah. We'll get to some specific issues in a moment, but do you think generally in approaching voice, it is something that requires a daily practice? Is it about seeing a coach? What would those practical steps be to help this unlocking or furthering of your voice?
I think a lot of people think, oh, I've trained my voice, tick. Whether that's because you've gone to drama school or you've done a week course with someone great who's been in town, or you've done an 8-week course. A lot of people think, yep, done that. But actually, any experience that affects the self affects the voice. So in that sense, your voice is different every day, every week, every month, every year. And it's also affected by what productions you've been doing. The demands of working in film are quite different to the demands of working in theatre. So if you've been doing lots of film work, when that inevitable theatre production comes up, your voice has to be able to adapt to that. So it's not something that you should just think, oh, I've done that, I've worked with a coach and that's it. You definitely do need some sort of daily practice. And it may not be, it doesn't have to be 20 minutes every day. It might be 5 minutes most days, and then 1 or 2 days a week, it's 10 or 20 minutes. Or you might find a drop-in class or as a warm-up online or something that you can be doing if you want to be guided through that. There's certainly nothing that compares to handing over that responsibility to a coach or a teacher, because then you can be fully immersed in your warm-up and you know that their eyes are on you if they need to bring attention to something that you might not be aware of. But in terms of a daily warm-up, I think it's a lot easier than most people think. They probably go, oh, I did so many different voice exercises. How could I possibly know which one to do, what I need right now? And actually, you have to become very good at knowing what it is exactly that you need and what you can incorporate into your own daily voice warm-up.
That's great. So we get a lot of questions about voice with the website, and I think one of the first things I'd love to chat about is fatigue. I think, as you spoke about before, especially people who've maybe gone from either short runs of theatre shows or they've done a lot of film and TV, and then all of a sudden they're doing a 8 nights a week show. What would you say to actors struggling with, I guess, vocal fatigue or just maintaining a voice through a long season?
You have to be really aware of your vocal load. Some shows that you do, you end up with a massive vocal load. You might have the majority of the text, or you might have just a really high intensity, a few high intensity moments through the text. It might just be a really demanding performance space. So you have to be really mindful of what is the amount of effort that is required of your voice for that run. And then you need to factor in, okay, well, if you know you have a really big load, like a 3-hour show, and it takes a lot out of you, that probably means don't go to the bar after the show every night, or don't get up really early and have a massive day of talking. You kind of need to factor in, okay, I need my voice for those few hours of the day, so I'm going to have more vocal rest through the morning, or have only one night of the week that I go to the bar, which is hard. That's hard for actors, because the bar's a very social place, and it's also a very professional place in some ways, because that's where you do your networking and chat to people after the show. But if you don't have a voice to go on stage with, then you have to prioritise that. So that's definitely one thing. I think a lot of people overlook the size of the vocal load and how that's going to affect the rest of their daily routine.
And then is that just about, I guess, if you know I'm doing Hamlet every night of the week, going, I'm going to take it easy in my personal life, I'm going to do a more extensive warm-up, things like that? Or
Yeah, exactly that sort of thing. I had one of my friends, her friend played Elphaba on Broadway, and she said for that time that she was playing Elphaba, it completely dominated her life. It was every part of her day, waking up at a certain time, going to her yoga class, not speaking at all during the day, doing so. Her whole life revolved around playing that role. There was no socializing. There was very little dipping into the outside world, because the role really required that of herself and her voice, and would be the same for a role like Hamlet. Yeah.
Second question we get a lot, and I know it's a bit of a dirty word in the voice world to certain teachers, but people often ask, again, maybe coming from a film and TV background, about projection or about filling a space. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I say to my students and the actors I work with, you got to lose the word projection. We're going to cross that word, take it out of the vocabulary. And that I learnt that from my teacher, Kristin Linklater, who had a very strong argument against the word projection. And it's that as soon as you think about projection, you think about putting in a lot of effort. You think about muscling up, reaching the back of the room. If you think about when you were a kid and you were told to project, you were probably told to project in school assemblies or talking in front of the class, project your voice. And so there was a lot of muscling up that happened. Instead of thinking about projection, think about resonance. Invite resonance to be part of your vocabulary. As an actor, you want to have a voice that is fully resonant. There are lots of different resonators in the body. You want access to all of them. You might want more access to a certain resonator for a certain role. So you want to have that resonance in the body, in the voice, but then allow your voice to resonate in the space that you're in. So the sound is carried through the space in a certain way. And then there's also that dual meaning of resonance, that if something can resonate with you as an audience member. So that's really what we want in the theatre as well. We want to be able to connect with the audience and reach them in certain ways. So resonating tends to be better than resonating invites in the audience. Projecting is, I've got something to put on you. I'm going to get this out to you, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I love that. Resonating with the audience. It's great. It's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
So probably the next thing that we get a lot is articulation, which is obviously a big part of voice work. Is that again something that just needs to be worked on, as part of a warm-up? What are your thoughts on articulation and getting better at it?
A couple of different thoughts. Firstly, there are a couple of mistakes that are made when it comes to articulation work. People think, articulation means I need to practice my sounds. So they do a lot of bidiga, 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 or going through certain clusters of sounds and that sort of thing, which is great and that's important, but don't overlook actually exercising the articulators. So your main articulators are your tongue, your lips, your cheeks sometimes. Also, the teeth are articulators, but they don't move, so you can't exercise them. But actually, stretching your lips, stretching the side lip, lifting and dropping the top lip and the bottom lip, seeing if you can move them separately from one another, moving the different parts of the tongue, moving the tongue from cheek to cheek, lifting the tongue up to the nose and then down to the chin. Just different things that are exercising these articulators inside the mouth, actually getting them more dexterous and more flexible and stronger, so then when it comes to making those sounds, you get a crisper, tighter, clearer sound. And then the other thing that happens with articulation exercises is that people go, I'm going to do my articulation exercises, but and they just practice and they lose everything else. And there's no point doing your articulation exercises unless you're still mindful of your body, your breath, your voice. You have to stay connected. Articulation work is one step closer to text. Right? Vocal progression goes from working on the physical self, so releasing any tension in the body and just becoming aware of the physical self, and then becoming aware of the breath and freeing the breath, making sure there's no holding in the breath, then actually starting to make some gentle sounds, so finding vibration. And once you've got that vibration going, starting to build the vibration, feeling energy come from vibration, feeling more vibration through the body, then getting to resonance work and building that amount of sound, visiting the resonators in isolation and getting more and more sound happening, then going to articulation, right? So all these other things come before articulation, and most of the time you find that once you've worked on all these other things, articulation is already happening. We haven't even looked at clarity of speech. But because you've got a freer physical self, you've got freer breath, and you've got a better connection to that initial vibration, and then the sound is building, then you're thinking more clearly, which has a massive effect on the clarity of your speech, right? Clarity of thought is clarity of speech. And so then you're that one step closer to getting to text, and finally you arrive at text at the end.
That's fantastic. Do you think as well, when you, obviously following that progression, but one thing we talk a lot about is just reading a lot of text and reading out loud text. Is that something you often recommend?
Absolutely, yeah. Reading out loud, but by the same token, connecting, as you, not just reading out loud in a lying in bed voice, but actually reading out loud, being aware of the breath, where breath is sitting in your body, where the voice is coming from, connecting to your voice and taking that voice into reading out loud. But you have to be reading out loud to feel how language sits in your mouth and to discover how you connect to certain language as well. What do certain words mean to you, or what is the definition of the word, or what does it bring up for you, and then in the context of the text itself. And then hearing that back as well and getting used to the feeling of your own vibration, your own sound, not listening to it, but experiencing the feeling of it.
One thing I think people hear more than anything else in notes about voice, I think, is tension. And it can often be maybe not the best directors or best voice coaches who are going, say to a young actor, oh, you've got a lot of neck tension. And so they spend the next 5 years going, oh, I know I've got neck tension. I'd love to talk a little bit about those two areas. One is taking on those notes from different people as you go through a career. And then also specifically on whether tension is something you should think about and worry about as an actor, or just work on doing things to kind of free your body generally.
Yeah, it comes down to knowing your instrument. You have to know and understand your voice and how the voice works, and even just a really basic anatomy and physiological, or anatomical and physiological understanding of how the voice works. So then when you hear these notes, you know what that means and what you have to be doing. You also have to know your physical self, so that if you do get a note like you've got neck tension, you know what to do with that, how to address that, and you know when you have addressed it, so you don't stay fixated on it for years to come. Know what brings it up, or when it comes up, or why it's come up, address it, and then move on.
Do you think generally with voice work, as an actor performing, say, on stage or on screen, you should never really be conscious of it while in performance? Or do you think it is something where you always have that sort of part of yourself that is aware of what's going on and you're checking in? Where do you sit on that?
I think it's different for every actor. Every actor's process is different. I've certainly worked with a lot of actors that don't want to think about it on stage at all, and I've worked with many actors that do want to think about it on stage. I think certainly you do all this work so that it's all available to you, but to me it seems like the last thing you want to think about on stage is voice, and that's what the rehearsal room's for. And I think that's what a lot of actors who don't want to think about it forget, that actually the rehearsal room time is when you do think about it, that's when you're laying the groundwork, particularly if you have to do some screaming or some shouting. Then you need to be working on, okay, how am I going to do this in a way that's effective, that gets what the director wants or gets what I want from the character, but doesn't damage my voice? Or I can do it in a way that I can do it 8 shows a week and get through a 2 or 3 month run. So you need to be working out, okay, what is the technicality behind that? And it probably comes along with doing some exercises before and after, not only a warm up, but a cool down as well. But your rehearsal time is the time to get that into your muscle memory. So that becomes the way that you do that part of the show, or that's the way you do that scene. And then when you're on stage, you don't have to think about it because you've done that in rehearsal. So it's kind of almost a bit of both, I guess, in that sense. I think a lot of people go, well, I don't want to think about it, so I'm not going to think about it in rehearsal. But that's what rehearsal's for, right?
Yeah, that's great. So the recent production we worked on together was with Sport for Jove Theatre Company, wonderful independent company here in Sydney. And they took you on quite early on in the rehearsal process, which I as an actor found so valuable. Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, I think Sport for Jove recognised that they, doing an outdoor season, it was going to be necessary to have voice support available to some actors who had never worked in that kind of performance space before. And they recognise that there's value in doing that work all throughout the rehearsal period. What usually happens is that what often happens is that you get partway through a rehearsal period, I'll get a phone call saying, can you please come in and work with this actor because they've lost their voice, or we could hear them in the audition but we can't hear them in the rehearsal room, or we could hear them in the rehearsal room but we can't hear them in the theatre, or something's going on, they can't access a certain character voice. And there's actually huge benefit to having that available all throughout the rehearsal period, because when I do end up on those shows, I walk in and the actor goes, oh, it doesn't feel very good being the one who's got the voice call halfway through rehearsals. And I know that I can usually help them, or that voice work will be able to help them and they will get to a better place. But it's certainly nicer for the whole cast if it's there the whole way through, so that none of them feels like they're under the spotlight at a certain point. So those actors that often the reason that has happened is that they may have spent they might be, very good vocally and have never run into any problems before, but they've spent the previous 6 months working in film, or they've spent the previous 6 months having a break. Or, it's been X amount of time since they've had a gig. And so they haven't necessarily been working on their voice, and that's often why they trip up, because they've gone, oh, I'm now in a show, so I'm now going to start doing my voice work. But actually, the most important time to be building that fitness is before you go into the rehearsal room.
One final question I'd just love to ask. I feel, because I personally felt so intimidated by voice work. We were talking before about, especially like drama school, how many hours of voice people are doing, which we can chat about. But I think, would you generally be optimistic to maybe a young actor watching this going, it is definitely doable to get a better voice and it not have to feel like a real struggle? Like it does feel sometimes like it's muscling up and it's going to the gym.
Yeah, it's something that it's totally achievable, but you do have to put in the work. If there is an extraordinary voice teacher in town and there's an opportunity to do 3, 4, 5, 2-week workshop, go and do it. To be fully immersed in that training for a period of a number of days in a row would be amazing, because that's a real chance for you to tune out of what's going on and tune in to yourself and your instrument and get to know it better. Then once you've done that, you've got to look out for it the next time it comes up, or find from that work something that you can be doing in your own day-to-day practice. But it's not something, you don't have to look at it and go, oh, well, that's something I'll never attain because I didn't go to drama school. But you do have to be realistic about the number of hours that it takes. I certainly find a lot of actors will contact me and say, I'm interested in doing some private voice work. I haven't done anything, or I don't have the availability to do an 8-week course. So can I come get some private sessions? And I'll fully prepare for them and be able to chat to them really early on about what the sort of pathway that we have to go through, like what they individually need. And then it's not uncommon to get 3 or 4 sessions in and the actor kind of goes, oh, well, I've done a few sessions, nothing's really changing, or, lots has changed, so I think I've got everything. And it's going to take longer than 4 hours, And I think for actors as well, at first they'll go, okay, well, that's, say that's $80 or $100 a week to go to a voice class. I'll spend that money on voice, but they don't necessarily factor in that that's going to be that price every week. So you have to keep budgeting for it. It's not something that you can't if you commit to that, commit to it and see it through and set yourself a time frame. That's when I see the best results. It's when people go, okay, I want to be able to do pilot season at the end of the year, so I'm going to spend this whole year perfecting my American accent, and they'll come in once a week or once every 2 weeks just to do that. Or, I'll work with an actor who says, I'm going to be doing a show at such and such theatre later in the year. I want to do my pre-production work, so I'm coming in once a month or once every 2 weeks to do a voice lesson to really gear up to that. The ones that drop out are the ones that don't have a goal in sight. So set a goal, set a time frame. Okay, this is what I'm working on this year. This is something I've been told I need to address, or this is something I feel I need to address. So I'm going to spend this 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 12-month period working on it, and you've got to stick to it.
That's great. Lovely note to finish on. Amy Hume, it's been wonderful to chat voice. If people want to learn a bit more about you or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can go to my website, amyhume.com.au, and send me an email.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for taking some time.
Thank you.